Hey guys, welcome to the 13th episode of the Recreational Bodybuilding Podcast. This is very weird because I'm introing it. But we are joined by co-host Maestro Brett Freeman, not the pro bodybuilder. We need to define that. And we are joined by Emilia Thompson. How are we going to say all of your PhD?
No, you're fine. You can stick with. I will totally take PhD, but the rest you can leave.
Sweet. So maybe for the listeners or for the one listener that maybe doesn't know of your work, maybe you can just give a brief kind of background into kind of who you are, what you do, etc.
Yeah, so I am a nutrition consultant first and foremost. My background is academia, so I used to lecture in sport and exercise nutrition for about 3 or 4 years, and so still teach a little bit, but predominantly now I work with people in terms of improving their relationship with food or improving their relationship with themselves, or as well, I suppose, their body composition and their health. And I run a team of coaches, and we work a lot. We're very evidence-based, but we work in the kind of the field of self-compassion and mindfulness, and we take a very holistic view of nutrition on the whole.
Yeah. So I feel like you've kind of helped a lot of maybe personal trainers, which I don't think you realize how many personal trainers you might have helped, which in turns helped a lot of people. You got to think that maybe per personal trainer you're dealing with like 50 plus clients. So I think that your work is not recognized enough. But anyway, that's not enough praise, right? Okay, cool. So we're going to be briefly talking about kind of maybe binge. I don't know whether to call it kind of the binge eating disorders. Maybe we'll just talk about binging in general. So maybe we'll just first off start with a question. So what would you define as maybe binging, or what would you define as a kind of binge eating disorder? And then maybe we could say I'll lead with that, and then we'll ask some more questions.
Yeah, so I suppose that the easiest way to introduce this is to kind of think of eating behaviors on a spectrum ranging from kind of optimized healthy nutrition to the other end of being clinical eating disorders. And then we've got this spectrum in between of disordered eating, and you can kind of, most people will flit up and down that scale in some way between kind of optimal health and clinical eating disorders. And what we generally find, at least in fitness and bodybuilding per se, is more so people fitting into the disordered eating class. And often when people diet for prolonged periods or very extreme, they tend to shift more towards this clinical eating disorders like side of things. And often there's this misconception about binge eating. There's a lot of misconceptions around binge eating, but as you said, binge eating disorder is actually an eating disorder, and that would be somebody who is frequently binging, and it's been going on for multiple times per week for multiple weeks and or months, and that requires clinical support. So you need to go through your GP or therapy and get specific clinical structured support if you have binge eating disorder. And that is, like I said, a very specific intervention. But often what we deal with, and what a lot of my clients tend to, a lot of my clients tend to fit, is people who overeat regularly, or people that feel that they eat or feel that they binge eat, but don't necessarily fit the criteria for binge eating disorder. And whether you fit the criteria or not, unfortunately, often depends on your GP, in the sense of, some people can go into the GP and say that they're binging regularly, and their GP might just say, your BMI is fine and it's not impacting your quality of life, for example, and often they don't get the support they need. But in general, if you feel that you are suffering with binge eating disorder, that's the route that you need to go down, and you need to push it. But there's a clear distinction between people who overeat, between overeating and binging, and the clear distinction really is both of them involve eating more, like a lot of calories in a short space of time. But the kind of key with binge eating versus overeating is that binge eating, you get this severe lack of control. So with overeating, you could potentially eat 3,000 calories in a sitting quite easily, and you feel that a little bit like, I'm just going to keep eating because it's there. But really, if someone came up to you and said, you have to stop this, you probably could stop it. Whereas with binge eating, it's very much you completely lose control and eat those calories in a short space of time, usually within 2 hours. And it's usually, I think the cutoff, I think it's above 1,500 calories. But you guys probably know that some people could quite easily eat 1,500 calories quite happily within an hour and feel completely fine. I do. So, and that's not binge, that's just because I'm hungry. So it is that kind of severe loss of control.
Mm-hmm.
But on top of that, what you also get is there's 2 different types of binges. So you get subjective binges and objective binges. And this, I think, is where, as coaches, we need to be really, really careful, because as coaches, we should all be screening for people with binge eating disorder and referring them on if they have an eating disorder to the appropriate people. But when you delve deeper into someone who says they binge eat, often you can brush it off if someone says, well, maybe like when I binge, I eat a packet of biscuits. And we might say, well, actually, that's not very much food. That's not a binge. You're just being silly. Let's just carry on. But that, to them, if they feel this complete lack of control, regardless of how much they've eaten, that's still classified as a binge to them. And if you look at the research around subjective and objective binging, they both impact someone's quality of life in the same way. So it's not just about the amount of food, it's very much that lack of control. And it doesn't matter actually if it's an objective binge or a subjective binge, both of them will impact someone's quality of life. So both of those do require additional support. So it's quite hard to screen for when you're a coach. And if you're in the fitness space, you probably all have come up, like we've all come up against these people who have these signs and symptoms because of the nature of the sport and because of the nature of dieting and that's relationship with binge eating.
Yeah, I think with kind of the binge eating disorder, I've certainly dealt with a few people. I mean, I don't know if you have, Brett, where they kind of have this. I don't know whether to call it an episode or not, but maybe they've had like a period of eating where they've eaten a lot of calories, but kind of don't realize how much calories they've kind of eaten unless someone's kind of like by their side. So let's say, for example, they have like a quote unquote episode, and maybe not that they've blanked out, but they just can't. They're maybe not with it, if that makes sense. They're kind of like not an out of body experience, but their maybe missus might say, "Look, you've eaten a lot of food," and they're kind of like step back and think, "Oh shit, yeah, maybe I've eaten like 2,000 calories here." But yeah, I don't know if you've had any experience about that, Brett.
I can't say I have, like in that respect. I've had clients where they've sort of come to me with sort of they've lived in that two minds of the extreme, but I'm not too sure if it is sort of those episodes, but they've sort of come at whether they're completely on a diet where they're being sort of maybe overly restrictive, or they're just completely off a diet. And maybe that's probably not binge eating, but it's more so of a hard rebound of that over restriction. And maybe there's some binge eating episodes at the beginning of that as well. So I'm not too sure if that's something we can cover, or maybe why that happens as well as a result of sort of over restricting and sort of having that rebound effect.
Yeah, and I think what you've described as well is quite common, whereby in this industry, binge eating's kind of become like a really colloquial term. So people will say, like, in that situation, it might well be that person is having a binge episode, but it might also be that person just cannot stick to their diet. And that's not, I'm not saying that's a willpower thing. It could be an overeating episode. It could be lots of reasons. It's not a willpower thing per se, but it's become very colloquial, and it's kind of diluting the difference between binge eating disorder and binge eating and overeating. And that's probably the type of person that you maybe come up against who maybe they might call it a binge, they might not. But actually, when you delve deeper, they might have slightly disordered eating habits, but it's not necessarily to that extreme.
Yeah, I would say, in them kind of scenarios, it would always be like, if they're in a deficit, for example, you would always kind of like get them to kind of your MyFitnessPal, see what you're actually eating. And 9 times out of 10, it's always like having non-volume like foods, like really low volume kind of foods, and then getting so freaking hungry that they then start to have this kind of quote unquote binge, but it's just, yeah, they're just very, very hungry. So yeah.
Yeah, I get a lot of messages from bodybuilders actually in my DMs that have coaches and are like, 6 weeks out from shows, and they message me kind of on the DL and they're like, I'm binge eating and I don't know what to do. And it's really difficult because you can't really help someone on like an Instagram DM who has a coach who's then competing to delve into, well, is it a binge? What goes on in the moment? How much did you eat? So it's difficult to decipher. But I also think as well, a lot of the time, especially in competing, actually, people are not necessarily honest with their coaches because they know what's going to happen potentially. If they are, that they would probably tell them to stop prepping. And so there's a lot of secrets behind it. So if you're someone like you guys your clients can be like, this is what happened, that sets you above the other coaches in the sense of, I just think there's a lot of coaches that don't get that open communication that is needed.
Yeah, I would say that I've had a kind of few clients that would maybe tell you you're eating a certain amount of calories, but are really not. So you're thinking like, let's just say, for example, like a 150-pound female is on like 3,000 calories and they're not like kind of gaining weight, and you're like, let's have a look at your MyFitnessPal and see what's going on here. But yeah, I was going to move the questions on to kind of, is there anything that maybe you've seen that's or that's quite common that maybe triggers a binge? Is it maybe, again, like touching on that, is it being too restrictive? Or maybe just like non-voluminous foods and then wanting to eat, or?
Yeah, so it's multifactorial and it's very, very individual. Usually, so if we're looking at binges and binge eating disorder, it's usually a combination of things. So we know first off, if we look at like the nutrition side of things, we know first off that dieting increases your risk of developing binge eating disorder or binge eating episodes. So dieting per se can increase your risk. And also the longer you diet and the more time, like the more chronically you diet, then the increased number of times you have dieted, all of that increases your risk or is associated with increased risk of binge eating in some way. And then if you look at types of diet, so you have two different types of, you can diet in two different types of way. You can diet in a rigid dietary restraint or flexible dietary restraint. And so rigid dietary restraint includes things like meal plans, specific food rules, so maybe fasting, not eating after 6, that type of low carb, etc., rigid dietary restraint. And then flexible is very much similar to what we call flexible dieting, but at the same time, flexible dietary restraint looks at there are no good foods and bad foods, so removing dichotomous thinking. It kind of describes the concept of, for example, if someone went out for pancakes in the morning rather than having eggs, then later on they would have a salad rather than go all out type of thing. That's flexible dietary restraint. And if we look at that in terms of the risk of binge eating, we know that rigid dietary restraint, again, increases risk of binge eating or developing binge eating episodes. So dieting and following structured meal plans, both of those will increase your risk. So if you're in the bodybuilding world, then you're at a really greater risk. But then you've also got issues around things like body image. So if you've got poor body image, or if you compare your body a lot and you have a high body image focus, then you're at increased risk of developing disordered eating. So again, bodybuilding, high risk here. But then we've also got another side of it, which is the emotional regulation side. And often binge eating can occur because people are unable to regulate their emotions in some way. So, for example, we've all known these people, and we may well have been these people who are dieting, and then something stressful happens in their life and it triggers them into a binge episode. And it's easy to say it's because of the diet, and the diet has not helped the situation, but it's then compounded by the fact that this person can't regulate their emotions. They don't know how to act in response to a certain emotion. And so rather than deal with that emotion and acknowledge that emotion and be mindful of that emotion, they then try to distract themselves or try to numb themselves with food. And that's another reason why people then fall into this binge eating cycle. And also then we have another increased risk of binge eating is when we have, like I said, dichotomous thinking, but very black and white thinking around a diet, say, where someone feels that if they eat one donut, then they go completely off plan. And when they do that, they lack the self-compassion to say, I've had a donut, I'm human, I'm going to move on. And what they do is they say, I'm a failure, I've screwed up my diet, I'm just going to continue to screw it up. And then they fall into this cycle as well. So there's so many factors, and then even in each of those kind of factors, you can delve even deeper into it, and you could go on all day about it. But I think what you were saying about, like being hungry, etc., that is something we tackle. If somebody was, for example, suffering with binging, and we were then like, right, or overeating, say, and they didn't fit the criteria for binge eating disorder, hunger regulation, for example, would be one of the things we would look at to stop that from happening. It's not necessarily a trigger per se, but if you are in that cycle, then yes, it is a trigger, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the recent studies, I think it was Jackson Pios had it on his Instagram post the other day, was I don't know if you've seen it, about the water. I think they did, I can't remember the exact study, but we obviously associate water with kind of filling ourselves up, but it actually had kind of the opposite effect. I don't know if you've seen that.
No, I didn't see it.
Oh, okay, yeah. But yeah, no, so I think it's, I was going to ask how to combat or how to kind of fix the binging, but I think it's got so many layers to it.
Well, there are certain things. So, like I said, obviously, if it's binge eating disorder, you got to refer it out, and if it's beyond your scope, then you've got to refer it out. But there are certain things. If somebody, for example, is overeating, and they're kind of out of control, they just want to stop overeating, for example. There are certain things that you can do. So, for example, the first thing is to ensure that you're eating regularly. So this kind of comes into the hunger thing. So eating every 3 to 4 hours is really, really important, and it's about eating to satiety every 3 to 4 hours. So often what happens when we diet is that we fall into this habit of like backloading calories and hoarding macros till the end of the day, because we know that's when we're going to be bored. We're both laughing like, yeah, that's my clients. Because we know we're going to be hungry later in the day, we know we're going to be bored, and we might well be training later in the day. So we backload calories, which is fine, it can support us in dieting, but often we try and maintain that after a diet. And after a diet is often when people are then falling into these destructive eating habits. And so they're at an increased risk of binging as it is. And then what they're doing is then they're staying hungry all day. And then it gets to the evening and they're really hungry. So then they end up eating their macros and beyond and feeling like they're out of control. So eating every 3 to 4 hours, not fasting in the morning, and spreading calories out throughout the day so that, your breakfast is almost the same size as your dinner in terms of energy density. That's the first thing. And for some people, actually removing tracking is the best thing to do as well. And I know that a lot of coaches won't do that. That would be something that I would do with people if they didn't have an eating disorder, but they were looking at this. I would remove tracking for a lot of them, because it's very much just about getting into a structure. And often people struggle with that because they say, well, I'm not hungry after 3 hours because I've had a big breakfast. And at that point, it's like, that's not really the point at this point. We're eating to stop binging rather than eating to hunger at this point. Longer term, you then look at kind of being a little bit more flexible with it and starting to listen more to internal cues, but that's kind of a longer term situation. Other things that you can do are, like I said, remove dichotomous thinking. So make sure that you have permission to eat any foods at any time. So you're not kind of keeping certain foods for weekends, for example. And one of the key is like, you only eat pizza on a Saturday night. Like, have it on a Tuesday. It's cheaper and like it breaks that like mentality. So removing dichotomous thinking is really important. Obviously, removing dieting. I would remove dieting for anyone that is binge eating in that way. Practicing like some sort of emotional regulation or mindfulness, whereby you keep a log of how you feel around that time, so that you actually get into the habit of seeing you know, for example, it might be that every time you overeat, you feel stressed, and you've written it down, and so you can say, right, well, what strategies do I have in place for stress management? And it's amazing how many times you say to someone, right, what do you currently do when you feel stressed? And they're like, I don't know. It's like, why don't you have a strategy in place for this? Is why we struggle, because we're told just to get on with things, and so we don't know how to manage anything, so we turn to food, alcohol, sex, whatever it is. So keeping like a log around anytime you overeat is really, really important, and reflecting on that, and practicing self-compassion, where, like I said, when you do go off track, you don't then restrict. That's the most important thing. You don't restrict after, you don't compensate after. You say, I'm human, that happened, and I'm just going to move on from it. It's really important. And also putting a pause in place. So actually, this is one of the hardest things to do, and I suppose it's a facet of mindfulness where you're very present in what you do, and you put a pause in before you eat that says, you know, am I hungry for this? How am I going to feel tomorrow if I do this? What will my future self thank me for in this moment? Those are all mindful self-compassion types of questions that you can put in place, but it's that pause is really difficult. It's because, like you said at the beginning, like that kind of out of body experience is really difficult to get that pause in, but that's why mindfulness is really important. And also practicing mindfulness with your eating. So when you do eat your meals, I think we spoke about this last time, but when you do eat your meals, make sure that you're eating without distractions, that you're taking your time, that you're present, those types of things. Again, they all seem like really small things, but once you add them up, you become a more mindful and compassionate person. You treat your body in a different way.
Yeah, I think one massive takeaway was something that I was speaking to Brett about was the kind of we always critique ourselves, but we never praise ourselves. So when we do something wrong, we're so quick to like kind of like degrade ourselves, like, why did you do that, whatever. But when you kind of maybe hit your nutrition goals, or kind of, I don't know, you train 4 times a week or something, you'd never really praise yourself. So trying to get that in place, maybe that kind of falls into the category of kind of the self-compassion, etc.
Yeah, we never do that. That's so true. Like, we never say what we do well, but we always just say what we do bad. And one of the things a lot of my clients will do is like affirmations every day. But when you say affirmations, people think you're just like saying, oh my God, my butt looks good today. And it's not about that. It's about saying, I either did something really good for my health today, or I went to the gym today, or I made someone feel good today, or I was kind today. All of these things are affirmations that contribute to your self-compassion in some way, and again, they're really easy things to do, but you're just much nicer to yourself when you love yourself. And I've been saying that for years, and it's gone from airy-fairy to almost acceptable now to sort of say that, but it's the kind of concept of self-compassion is treating yourself like you would treat someone that you love, and it makes sense. We just don't often do it.
I was going to say, like, this is like, it's almost like quite foreign when you think about like the bodybuilding community, right? Like they have this mindset of like they have to grind every day, and it's every day is a war. And I think but even like in the evidence-based community, it's sort of like they've got that, but then they've also got maybe a lot more X's and O's and what's the research behind this. And I think something that you bring to the table, Emilia, which is something that isn't talked about enough, is sort of actually having those internal conversations, which I think is you sort of see what's on paper, you follow a plan, and every day is like you get it done or you don't. But I think one thing you're bringing in, which is sort of another pillar, is like, okay, how does that actually make you feel? Like, are you actually, like you said, like compassionate to yourself? How do you react when, not so much as a tactic of how to overcome a overeating episode, like, oh, here's how you can reduce your calories, but actually what's your mindset towards that, and what conversation you having to sort of help alleviate that. So yeah, I just want to recognize that's sort of one thing why I'm a huge fan of yours, is sort of you bring something different. And I think that's something that isn't part of, is almost not exclusive to, especially the male side of bodybuilding. And maybe a quick tangent, but how would you go about how have you found working with, I guess, more the male bodybuilders and athletes, and sort of encouraging them to be like that, because I can imagine it being quite difficult to sort of take them away from that go hard or go home sort of mindset.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Riley. That was really nice. So background, like I obviously didn't say this at the beginning, like I used to compete, so you think you know that, but I competed for 4 years and like I did pretty well. But now I only prep. I have male clients who don't compete, but I only have one male client who competes, and he's been with me for a couple of years, and he's fantastic, and he meditates on show day, but he also is one of the most meticulous people I've ever met when it comes to prep, and he's just like so straight up and does everything. So that's a breeze, and he is compassionate towards himself and present, and he's kind of encompasses all, and I've had no backlash, I suppose, in that sense, and he works harder than anyone. So, but I don't prep male clients in general. That's kind of beyond my scope, I think. In general, there's a couple of exceptions, obviously. I think I have had a lot of backlash from the bodybuilding community. Not so much negative, but more so just kind of like shunned, like she doesn't compete anymore and that's whatever. But it's more accepted now, and especially with like some of the female prep coaches, they talk about it a lot, and I speak to them quite about it a lot. So it is included more so now. I just think there's always going to be people who dig their heels in, and I kind of compare it to when I competed. No, like not that many people did flexible dieting at that point. So I was like, I finished competing in 2018, I think, or 2017 actually. And by that point, people were flexible dieting, but at the beginning they weren't. So I remember I used to do things like I would eat crumpets all the way up to show day, and I would make a point of eating crumpets, and I got so much backlash from people about doing that, like top female prep coaches putting things out saying, certain people can eat carbs, and these were the types of coaches that had everyone on keto, for example, and they would try and make me out to be the exception rather than the standard. So now I kind of equate it to that, where I just kind of think there are always going to be people that sort of say that's not applicable in bodybuilding and you have to go that bit further, and it's like, that's true, but my male client woke up on show day, meditated, and then won a trophy. So you can do it all. It's just, I just think people like the glory of grind harder, bro. I think it gives them their ego a nice little rub. And bodybuilding, and I can say this because I was a bodybuilder, like we're all egotistical in some way. That's why we like it.
Yeah. I think people, well, I think the phrase is first they ask why, then they ask how. I think if people see that there's a edge to that, if they see that there's a like tactical edge, like, then people will start to gravitate towards it. So yeah, I think it's only a matter of time before people start, like the masses start going towards that kind of route.
But I mean, there is like, like I said, I get these male clients who have other coaches messaging me saying I'm binging, and then I've not told my coach. It's like, if that coach just went, do you know what, it happens, we move on, rather than saying, right, we're just going to up your cardio, you're an idiot, why are you not sticking to your diet? The amount of coaches I see that say binge eating is you just don't want it hard enough is beyond me. Like, these could be top coaches, and they could have clients who get loads of trophies, but they could potentially have clients who get more trophies, because the ones that are eating 2 packets of donuts on a night might not do that if they just told them it was okay and they moved on. So I hope that we get there, but I don't know if we will. But obviously, like, having these discussions is really helpful, I think.
Yeah, I think often it's just I don't know if there's like a lack of compassion, or whether it's just saying, like, just a really bluntly, like, kind of like a mallet saying, like, you're weak, you need to kind of grind harder, bro. I'm not too sure which one it is.
I think it's both. Yeah, I think it's both. I think it's lack of understanding and education on it, and then also people not caring. These tend to be the coaches that then have 300 clients, so they don't have time to be compassionate.
Train harder, train harder, train harder. Next.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Do you have any more questions?
I think that's about it. I think we had some nice little practical takeaways there.
Yeah. No, that's no, Emilia, that was beyond fantastic. I think one thing you sort of helped make people more aware and maybe be a bit more conservative when they maybe self-disorder or consider what binge eating actually is and make people think twice about what that is. You've also sort of defined what people's scope as a trainer and coach should be. It's not probably our job to deal with people's disordered eating. And then also some really good takeaways on if you do have maybe some episodes on how to deal with those, and of course capped it up with really understanding how to be and maybe raising the awareness around how us bodybuilding guys and gals should be maybe a bit more compassionate and less harsh on ourselves. So yeah, that was really good. To be honest, I'd love to get you on to go to dive a bit deeper into some of those topics, but yeah, I think right now that was a really cool overview. So thank you.
Of course, thank you for having me on.
Sweet.
Awesome. Emilia, do you want to maybe tell the people where we can find you if we want to find out more about your services, what you do, and yeah?
Yeah, so I'm most prominent on Instagram, really. My Instagram is Emilia Thompson PhD, and my website is emilia.fitness. But also I run a holistic nutrition program online called EIQ Nutrition, where we delve into the more holistic side of things. So that's for coaches, but it's also for non-coaches who just want to learn more about this stuff for themselves.
Awesome. So guys, make sure you go check all of that stuff out. Jack, do you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, I don't know how you wrap it up.
I don't know. You just say bye. I think that's it.
Goodbye, people of the world. That sounds really okay. Until next time.
Thanks, Emilia.
Bye.